Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Hello everyone, thank you for having me. Happy to be here. This is the first place I came 23 years ago or so. This room was where I was taught to meditate by my preceptor Shantinayaka, who lives in Vancouver now. And I was just thinking about that. And and thinking about sharing, just this being quite a different context, just the Gay Buddhist Fellowship, which I really appreciate coming to. I've been on retreat, well, I came back not this past Friday, the Friday before. I've been on retreat for about a month on solitary. And one of the things I was thinking about is what I would talk about this night, among other engagements that I have. And one of the things I end up doing on retreat is exploring the tradition that I'm a part of. Often if I'm on retreat with like other people and a teacher, they'll be leading meditation practices and there'll be a program that I can plug into. But if you've ever been on solitary, you just have to kind of figure it out. There you are with a month of space or whatever it is that you've chosen to create for yourself. And personally, I often find myself thinking, retreats have held me in the past. I'll just approximate some kind of retreat schedule. And so I start doing a retreat schedule. Give or take, this is what happens. I'll start doing a retreat schedule, and then I'll start thinking, what else do retreats do? Oh, they do these ceremonies. Well, maybe I'll do some of those. And, and I eventually find myself doing a lot of the very traditional practices that I've been taught. But maybe it's the type of person I am. I try to make it, I don't want to feel, how do I put it? I don't want to feel forced. I don't want to feel like I'm doing something somebody told me to just because they told me to do it. I'm not one to really sign on for religion's sake, so to speak. And yet I find myself doing all these very religious things, which I don't necessarily have to get too into. But I wanted to ask people here, actually would like a response. And I'm interested in both for better and for worse. For better and for worse. What is religion for better and for worse? You just give that a thought. I'll give you guys maybe 30 seconds for you to think about it. Choose for better and for worse. Maybe you could do both, maybe one, doesn't matter. That's probably enough. For better and for worse.
Well, for me, religion is a lot of chanting and singing of beautiful poetry.
Thank you. I won't ask you if that's for better or for worse. But you don't have to say. Go ahead. Anybody else?
For me, religion for better is a source of faith of getting through tough times.
Uh-huh.
For worse, it's an organization telling me what to do.
Thank you.
For me, religion is a leap of faith into the unknown
Uh-huh.
and a certain surrender.
Thank you.
And sometimes that's for better and sometimes that's for worse.
Wow, great, thank you.
A sense of community,
Uh-huh.
and I think like that also, for better or for worse, you can feel very included or very excluded from that, right?
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah, great, thank you.
For better, it's looking into the unknown,
Uh-huh.
and for worse, it's stereotypical behavior.
Thank you.
I think for better, as a child, it was a sense of community in a small rural place that I grew up in.
Uh-huh.
And it was a way to have a sense of social engagement with others. And then as an adult, for worse, it was just a sort of regiment that didn't coexist with my sense of self as an adult. So,
A regimen, yeah,
or, yeah.
thank you.
Living.
Oh, a regimented way of living, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, too forced.
Yeah, too forced, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I grew up in a Christian community, which was community, and there was a lot of kindness and compassion there. But that kind of changed when I came out as a gay man. So condemnation and judgment there. So both positive and negative. And I've experienced as an adult here for almost 50 years Christian communities that have been very community-based and wonderful and charitable.
Charitable.
And others that have been judgmental. Whatever. So I think it's both. People bring their stuff with them.
Yes, thank you.
Sometimes.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. I like to hear, something, and it helps me be engaged with you. And I'd like to say, like, when I think about this and when I talk to people about it, I realize that, like, religion is life. Like, all of those things apply to life, right? For better and for worse. And I was on my retreat, and I was doing all this devotional practice, chanting and whatnot, and finding it very rewarding in ways that I was not really thinking too much about, truthfully. I was alone, so I got with weeks to go, so why waste my time thinking about what's working? And then, at some point I started thinking about it. I was listening to a book which I was reading at the time, which I will reference some, but it was talking a bit. It was invoking my curiosity about, well, what is this? What is this that's working? For the better, it seemed to me. And I guess the Buddha said this thing about when he awakened. It's from traditional texts that go back to some of the earliest parts of Buddhist literature. The Buddha was said to have said, I always like to say, said to have said, house builder, sort of referencing some house builder. Maybe it was himself, maybe, I don't know. He said, your ridge pole is broken. You will no longer be building a house for me. A kind of exclamation of liberation. And you get this sense of that there was somehow he was trapped, and he felt liberated from this, and had broken through something. And so the question is, like, what does this mean? What is constructed, and what has been dismantled, in what the Buddha exclaimed, And this is where I bring in what I was reading about I was reading a book that actually, this is the third time I've read this book because I'm really quite interested in it. And it's a book by a researcher who researches emotion. Lisa Feldman Barrett. It's called How Emotions Are Made. And so I'm going to reference that a little bit. But the basic thesis for that is about how, well, she's very into the brain. She's a scientist. I'm not so into the brain. I'm into the mind, which, I could care less whether or not you've mapped some kind of physicality in relationship to it, because I observe my own mind. I talk to other people about their minds. But regardless, she speaks in terms of the brain and neurology. And from her research, she has concluded that emotional experience has no fixed physical correlate. We may smile when we're happy, but we might not. We might have a blank face. I don't know, all the little things that scientists used to think maybe corresponded to emotional experience. Her research shows that there isn't, there's patterns that can kind of be seen, but they aren't universal. And essentially, the human experience of emotion is one that's actually far more varied than any notion of what happiness is, or what anger is, or what kindness is, or what fear is. Doesn't really have a physical correlate that actually can be measured and pronounced to be existent in the world. Her theory is that emotion is constructed. It's a cultural construct. It's equivalent to a concept that we have learned. That is her thesis, which I find very interesting, and actually if I really look at my emotional experience, it makes a lot of sense, actually. So the house builder has built an entire edifice of emotional experience for us that can be broken down. We can be liberated from it. And what does that mean? Well, Buddhism is about emotional liberation. It's about being free to maybe discover or even create new ways to relate to the world. And that's what occurred to me, that maybe my devotion and these practices, these chantings are this sitting alone for a month is a way of me searching, discovering, finding new ways of perceiving my emotional landscape that sort of lift me out of creatively and sometimes quite abruptly the regular patterns that are really about how I communicate to myself about what's happening to me in relationship to others. And also it's how I communicate to my loved ones, to my coworkers, about what's happening with me. So what we think is emotion, a lot of it tends to be how we communicate, kind of subtly. We don't realize it. We're kind of communicating to ourselves about what's happening. But also, it's what happens kind of in the background. It's an anticipation. This is one of the things that Lisa Feldman Barrett talks about in this book, is that emotional experience is a kind of semi-sub or even unconscious way that we predict what's going to happen next. Yeah. Does the situation require a little bit of adrenaline? And, or does it require us to conserve energy? Does it require us to, all those little subtle things that happen inside the body to either conserve energy or express energy, flight, fright, that kind of fight, that kind of thing. But she suggests that actually that what seems like an unconscious reaction is something that tends to correspond to a conceptual construct that we have both communally and internally reified, so to speak. And therefore, if that's true, which is what she posits. The theory of constructed emotion is what she calls it. If that's true, we can take the bull by the horns, so to speak, and learn new emotional ways of experiencing. And then if we learn them enough, they might start coming spontaneously. If we imagine them into existence, they might actually start becoming this. And this is actually my lived experience when it comes to devotion. I will tell you that, like, the notion of bowing to Buddhas and doing these chants and like imagining that I'm asking, Green Tara, who's the active compassion in the world, to somehow help me. Those all sounded very strange to me when I started practicing Buddhism. I was very philosophically based when I started. I was the idea that everything has a condition, and when those conditions change, so do everything else changes, was why I knew I was a Buddhist. And that seemed very straightforward. Yeah? But then what is all of this devotional practice and chanting about? I don't know. But I did it because I had faith in that idea, and I also had faith in the community that I was practicing with. And I found that it was having an effect, slowly but surely over time. And then over time, I started spontaneously having really what I could only describe as sort of religious feeling, like the chills when I would think about how grateful I was for the context I was in and the teachers who came before them, that kind of thing. Like things that I thought that I'd never really, emotional experiences sort of didn't fit my general experience. And when I look at the tradition, actually fits very well, so to speak. New emotional landscape. And so I want to talk about practice from that perspective, that we are imagining into existence a new emotional palette that actually is more appropriate to the world, more appropriate to happiness, and prepares us better for everything. Everything from joy to the depths of loss. Yeah? So that is what we're looking at. And to look at this, we also have to consider the way in which our general culture of emotions actually kind of trap us, kind of bind us, actually poke us, hurt others. That's helpful. That's part of the thing, is actually to kind of see that the standard toolkit of emotions that we have may not be the greatest, like, first of all. So that's the first thing we want to do, is kind of recognize that maybe that toolkit is inadequate. And maybe not for you, but maybe it is. And we can think about a lot of situations where standard emotional experience that we sort of inherit has not served us. And I've got a list. We don't really need to go in there. I could actually ask you guys to share. One of the things that Lisa Feldman Barrett says is that that emotions are object-oriented. Yeah, and I think that is not hard to kind of realize. They don't come from nowhere. They tend to be conceptually object-oriented in the sense that they achieve a goal. They prepare us when we see a thing we want, don't want, etc. They prepare us almost physically to come confront that thing, right? Or to consume that thing, like saliva. Like when we see a really nice piece of food. That's an emotional experience. We're being prepared to eat this food. Or adrenaline. We're being prepared to pummel somebody. Who knows, So I'm going to... I've been learning to play the guitar. And one of the emotions that's kind of object-oriented is the anticipation of playing in front of other people and how difficult that makes it to kind of learn. Sometimes when I'm playing by myself, I'll play for hours and I'll just get it just right. I'll know that, I can do it, but I can't do it every time. But I know I have this knowledge that actually my fingers and the timing will work from time to time. And then, as I practice, the time to time becomes slightly more often and more often and more often. But yet, when I stand in front of somebody, it's never. right? And it's that the object is that I will be able to achieve impressing people with what I know I can do, but actually am not able to do when I'm nervous. And so I have an emotional experience. Most people would call it stage fright. Like, that's a way of describing this emotional experience. And it doesn't really serve me very well. Yeah. So anyway, just to say, that's an example of emotional experience not really preparing me for what I would like it to prepare me for. I would like it to prepare me to be calm, collected, and concentrated in the way I am when I'm alone and really just interested in the tactile feeling of my guitar and the sound of my voice corresponding to it, right? And it's an exploration that I want to do. I just want to be able to do it in front of people, right? That emotion is not preparing me for appropriately for the experience. In a sense, I'm trapped by it. And, you know, you could think of people who go into business and who, you know, who the object of their situation is that their sense of self is connected to kind of their success or their, you know, what they know they can earn, so to speak, and this kind of thing. And so that the ups and downs of business is torturous and nerve-wracking, right? I mean, maybe there's a different way that person could experience going into business. Maybe they think of it more like an adventure that will have its ups and downs, right? Just like with the music, I could, if I really focus on the aesthetic interest, like that emotion of trying to explore the way one chord leads to another, to like really feeling it, listening to it, rather than the other goal, which is to impress people, which is pretty divorced from the way I pay attention to the guitar, which is actually what helps me be successful. It's a similar thing with business. It's like what helps you be successful is not, you know, running from the down times and running towards the up times. That's how people lose all their money, if you know what I mean. If life is an adventure where you're investing for the long term and you know there's going to be ups and downs, you're much more prepared to go into business. Social media, you know, your object is public approval, which, I mean, people are tortured over constantly, you know. And, you know, I don't know what the liberated aspect of that would be, but maybe it's going into the media platform and just being sort of joyful when you notice that other people, you know, spending more time rejoicing in how other people have a nice vacation and how other people have, I don't know, beautiful hair. I'm not sure. Etc. So just to say, I'm just trying to paint the picture of how there's an emotional landscape that traps us. And traditionally in Buddhism, it's called the eight worldly winds. The objects of praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, ill repute, good repute. That we enter into the world with those as our objects, and we just feel pummeled by it. We just feel pummeled by it. And that maybe there's a way to have an emotional landscape that is not so pummeled by these winds, the worldly winds, right? And Lisa Feldman Barrett talks about emotional granularity, which is one way to talk about expanding your palette to be more appropriate. So there are emotions that might be close, you know, close to anger, close to greed, covetousness, that are just actually slightly more helpful, actually. And I mean, you know, if we have words for anger that are more like moral clarity, you know, like rather than just outright indignant, you're actually, this is my moral clarity. Or fierce compassion. I really like that. You know, your body is preparing itself to look for how you can actually have a good impact in the world when you're quite upset about the opposite. Jealousy, inspiration. a wish to cultivate your own potential. Maybe it feels almost exactly the same. Maybe you just need to expand your palette a little bit and call it something else that actually serves you rather than making it about not having what somebody else has. Yeah. Anxiety. Alert presence could be alert presence or a call to mindfulness. So, yeah, it is interesting. I recommend this book, How Emotions Are Made, but her research really shows that people who have a wider gamut, many more ways of describing their emotional experience, actually measure as happier in many respects. And her theory is that these people have a bigger toolkit. You know, they're not just a hammer. They're not trying to take screws and hammer them in. You know, oh, it's a nail, good for a hammer, but now I need a drill. You know, the point is a better toolkit for preparing ourselves for the world. So, coming back around to enlightened emotional reality, we do have a emotional palette that the Buddha presented to us. And I'm not going to go into all of them, but there is things like the perfections, also known as the paramitas. There are 6, depending on the system you're looking at. And things like generosity, patience, wisdom. Anyway, I'm not going to go into the paramitas, but the Brahma Viharas are very common. That is equanimity, universal loving kindness, universal compassion, and universal sympathetic joy, which generally are not, it's not what we learn. They're not what we learn growing up. We don't learn to be universally kind. We might tend to learn to be kind in certain situations, but we don't learn to expand that outward and rest in it as a principle that we wish all beings well, and etc. So Brahma Viharas, those are the ones I just mentioned, but there are also other emotions that we're taught on the Buddhist tradition. There's 3 in particular. Shraddha, which is translated as faith, but actually let's just use the word Shraddha so that we can get away from the problematic nature of the word faith. Shraddha, or Saddha, which etymologically apparently means something like to be willing to place your heart upon. But generally means something like conviction in, inspired conviction in. And then there's 2 other words. I'm going to go into these 3 words. There's 2 other words. There's Hri and apatrapya. And both of them roughly could be translated as shame, which is really awful. Yeah, because they're not. The best translation I've heard says that there's something like self-respect in relationship to others is apatrapya, and self-respect in relationship to yourself is Hri. Which means that you have a notion of the goodness of yourself. Yeah? And when you fall short of that in relationship to the perception of others, you experience apatrapya. Which means self-respect in relationship to falling short, in relationship to the perception of others. Meaning you want other people to perceive you the way you would like to perceive yourself. Hri is the other way around. It's your perception of yourself in the most positive light when you've fallen short of your own ideals. Yeah. So Hri is like it's like raw self-respect. It's like that subtle, I like to think of it as kind of a blushing in the face of me knowing how much I would like to grow into my own ideals from where I am, as a kind of vision, as a kind of imagined vision. And that's an emotional experience that is very, very positive, nothing but positive. It's not shame in any of the negative senses. It's only positive. And that's why I try to say we have to create a new emotional word. It isn't this other word at all. It's this word that really is about us being like, wow, I'm so excited to grow into what I want to be, and I am not that. Yeah? And that can be in relationship to the perception of others and perception of self. And so that's what these devotional practices are about, partly. And one of the things I've done is put up here on this shelf a picture of one of the meditations we do in my tradition, which has roughly, it's very complicated, has roughly 50 figures on it. And they're all enlightened figures. Everybody from the actual historical Buddha is on there, to Padmasambhava, who is a kind of rogue-like looking amazing figure from Tibet that has these like fantastic eyes that just takes everything in with a lot of energy. To Milarepa, who somebody was talking about earlier today, is on there. Milarepa's on there. To 6 of Sangharakshita is on there, who's the founder of our tradition. And what we do is we sit and we imagine all these figures, something like that. I'm not a visual imaginer, so you don't have to like visual. Some people are very visual and they imagine the whole thing, but I kind of have, I go through the list of all of these characters. I have them memorized. There's 50 or more, actually, slightly more than 50. And each figure, you have a sense of them and the stories that are connected with them, like the teachings and the stories that they have. Like I've studied all 50 of these teachers in one way or another. At least I have something, some kind of anecdote, if you know what I mean, that comes from the awakening process from that particular teacher. And I go through all of them. Oh, this was Yogi Chen was Bhante's my teacher, one of my teachers, Bhante's meditation teacher, who went on a 4-year retreat on the edge of this Himalayan village, kind of way off. And by the time he was halfway through the retreat, the village had grown so that his hut was in the bazaar, like it was in the marketplace. So, and he used to give teachings to our teacher from this like hut, and he opened up the door, and there was people, selling potatoes and all this stuff, And actually, Yogi Chen later moved to the Bay Area, and Yogi Chen was known for like buying pets at pet stores and releasing them, which I'm not sure is out of compassion. Out of compassion, I don't know, I don't think that sounds very intelligent, but nonetheless, he was a very compassionate man. Especially songbirds he would release. And anyway, so that's one figure, and I'll go through all 50. I know something about all of their lives. But they all kind of invoke a certain story, a certain emotion. And in relationship to all of them, I form this vision of how I want to grow into being part of that community. And so I cultivate free faith, shraddha, free shraddha and apatrapya in relationship to them. And it's a very positive emotional experience. And that's what I realize is happening when I'm expanding my emotional toolbox. And I think we can do that with many both modern examples, whether it's Thich Nhat Hanh, the Dalai Lama, Dipa Ma. There's a lot of Buddhist teachers, and you don't even have to do Buddhist teachers. Of course, you can expand into the Muslim faith, the Christian faith, any kind of native spiritual faith that you have exposure to, any figure who represents the qualities that you would like to grow into, you can contemplate. And traditionally, after visualizing this image, we do prostrations. You may have seen this. We have inherited it to some degree from the Tibetan tradition. We are not a Tibetan tradition, but we do prostrations. We do like throwing ourselves down over and over again while visualizing this particular tree. It's very religious. I'm telling you, it's very odd. And I understand it to be cultivating this aspect of emotion. So, yeah, Buddhism is a path of emotional and existential liberation from calm instead of agitation, compassion instead of resentment, joy instead of envy, equanimity instead of attachment. And I do believe it can be done. And I think at some point it's possible to be, I think you can achieve it to a little bit and we can achieve it a lot. But I think this whole notion of breaking out of the house built by the emotional landscape that traps us is something that is very achievable in small scale and large scale. And you might reach the point, just like the Buddha at some point, I'm hoping all of us together realize that we can be free from the emotions that trap us in suffering. So that's it.
You okay with questions, comments?
Yes, I wasn't sure how much time I'm
We can
supposed
take a few minutes,
Yeah, okay.
So is there a program? Are there first steps we might take to remake our emotions?
Absolutely. I mean, if you read Lisa Feldman Barrett, she says that essentially creatively imagining emotions is one practice that you can simply do. So as I described, in a situation of anger, you know, you can say, oh, this is anger, but maybe there's a way to imagine this to be something else, like she said, like that practice that I described, where you say, no, this is actually moral clarity. But of course, you need to do it yourself. Because one of the other things that she just says is that all of our emotional landscapes, we think this is anger and this is what people feel when they're angry. But no, that's what you feel then, period. Meaning it's totally unique to you and your situation and your objects of thought, if that makes sense. Every emotional experience is unique to the object of thought you're having in that moment, period. And you get to name it, you get to rename it. And when you rename it positively as a liberative experience, again and again and again, it will more be about moral clarity and less about that kind of other stale emotion that you thought actually you were having. Does that make sense?
Maybe.
Maybe. That's one practice. That's one practice. There are others. I mean, you could just fall back on the basic Buddhist practice of ethics, meditation, and wisdom, meaning follow the 5 precepts, you know, sit quietly with non-judgmental observation, and then analyze whether or not your perceptions and thoughts are really completely true all the time, which is what the Buddha taught. Yeah. So that's the standard Buddhist. But I'm interested in the scientific notions of what works too, you know. Yeah. Is that sort of, yeah.
Jim Stewart's online with his hand up.
Thanks, Prasadachitta, for another wonderful talk. I was moved by your concern with your guitar playing, that you not disgrace yourself in public. And it reminded me of once I was preparing to play a song that I had written, but it had 3 very tricky measures that I couldn't do. And I was going to abandon the whole thing. And I heard my piano teacher long dead, but when she wanted to demonstrate something, she'd say, move over. And she'd move in place and she'd play it. And I heard her say, move over. And inwardly I did. And she played through me my piece perfectly.
Yes.
So there's a mastery that is in us that we have to believe in, I think. Anyway,
Yes.
Wonderful talk. Thank you very much.
You could describe that as an emotion. There's some emotion of allowing yourself to be played
better.
through.
Yeah.
To be played through.
Mm-hmm.
You have to find a name for it, but I don't know. To be played through is
Relief.
possible.
Okay, so if I'm understanding what your talk is about, it's liberating yourself from the current definition of an emotion by redefining it.
That's one way to work, yes.
Okay, so this is interesting because as I learn about Western psychology and it talking about how there's certain, I would imagine an emotion is telling you that you have a need, like a psychological need. And I think that's a Western point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's interpretations of Buddhism that I've heard, which is to rid yourself of any psychological needs. Which I don't know if that's really, I don't believe that that's possible.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm curious to know what your interpretation of, what your definition Could you give your definition of emotional liberation that you said at the beginning?
Emotional liberation is when your emotional experience is so appropriate to what's actually occurring that it prepares you in the way you need to be prepared.
Nice. Thank you.
I think I heard this way, I liked the idea of changing anxiety into heightened awareness. Because I've dealt with anxiety for most of my adult life, and I like the idea of heightened awareness. That's a nice way. So that is what you said.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I also am trying to allude to the broader process of creatively looking for all new ways of finding emotional space in the current emotional palette that you currently have. And only you can do that. That is one of the things about the Buddha Dharma, is that like we can describe the exploration, but really only you know the landscape that you're working with. I don't. I have a vague idea of my own landscape, truthfully. But we can engage with it creatively, and we don't need to call what we experience what we think we need to call it. Yeah. That's the main thing.
Oh, I had a question. What films have you been involved in?
Currently, I've been involved in a film that's going to come out in the next few years about Tom Frost, who's one of the first climbers to climb El Capitan. It's a documentary. That's the only real film. I created my own film. It's about 45 minutes about my friend who built tiny homes in for homeless people. That you may have seen them at one point. They're like full-on homes that roll around in the city, and he it's just on YouTube. Most of the other work that I've done are small educational videos about public health and healing that is done at UCSF through groundbreaking research and things like that, which mostly is my paid work. Yeah.
Not using psilocybin, right?
No, not yet. But sometimes those show on CBS, but they're kind of paid ads by UCSF. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, online, offline? Yep, go ahead.
Thank you also for what you presented. You caused me to think about emotions and what they mean. And when I think about myself, I just consider myself this complex neural, electrical, chemical being that experiences the world.
Yes.
And the problem comes when someone says to me, "What are you feeling?"
Yes.
Then I've got to label it.
Yes.
And that's an artificial condensation of the complexity that I'm experiencing.
Sure.
The other thought came when you were describing with the guitar playing, and when you're alone and you finally reach the point where you got it right on, and then you did it in front of someone else. And what occurred to me was we are so often afraid of judgment when we perform in front of someone else, rather than just doing it for ourselves in the moment.
Yes.
And someone else happens to be there.
And I would suggest that a lot of emotion is about fear of judgment. A whole lot of it. That's my experience anyway.
What's your definition? Oh, thanks. First of all, thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. What is your definition of religion?
That's interesting. I personally, this is a very inward thing. I don't necessarily use it. I usually want to know what other people how other people define it before I even talk to them about it, because my inward decision about how I define it is so out of correlation most of the time. So that's, to be fair.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Okay. But I think of religion as a kind of placeholder, as an activity that is about transforming general mundane activities and general mundane goals into a kind of universal, worthwhile goal.
Yeah, because I think Buddhism, for me personally, I don't think Buddhism is a religion. I think Tibetans are religious because they have lots of stuff. But I think of Buddhism as either a philosophy or a psychology.
Right. And I would say that those are both true, and that what makes Buddhism as a religion is what I've been describing today, which is that psychology tries to analyze this is just I'm not a psychologist, but I understand it to look into the environment, see who's relatively happy and stable, and see who relatively is unstable and unhappy, define why that is, and then move people from this category to that category. What makes Buddhism a religion rather than a psychology is it says, no, there's a psychological framework that all these people can grow out of and move into that transcends the general framework, rather than working with what is here. And it transcends it. It says there's a way of, there are emotional states that actually break all the standard mundane rules. And so in terms of philosophy, it's not a philosophy because it has practices to do that. It doesn't just spend its time describing why it's possible, or if you see what I mean, which philosophy sort of is the thinking around why something is logical, feasible, possible, or not. And it's important, but if that's all you do, and you don't spend time doing the actual mysterious practices that actually achieve it, then you're doing a philosophy and not a religion. That's how I think about it.
I think my problem is I think of religion as dogma.
Sure.
But today you changed my mind.
It's definitely not that to me.
Yeah.
And so therefore I don't use the term very often, because most people think of it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So to me, it sounds like the key is, not labeling what you're experiencing, because,
Yes.
saying something's an emotion and it's not, or whatever. Like, I sort of had the opposite experience when I first came here of your retreat experience, because I wanted to learn how to meditate, and then I happened on one time dropped in, and it was I think it's called a puja, and they were prostrating and bringing up stones and stuff, and I was like, oh my God, I was raised Catholic, and I was like, you know what, I'm not gonna get into this, I'm just gonna keep meditating, so it was, but it really just all worked out, like, because I just kind of grew up in California,
Right.
also, it was the opposite of your growing up very controlled Catholic.
Sure.
But I had the same result because of
Yes.
where I grew up. So I just think the key is not labeling it.
Sure. I would agree in a sense, and in another sense, labeling is a part of our perceptual matrix.
Yeah.
Like, you see something, you see a tree, you just know it's a tree. There's no way you can unknow that.
Yeah.
And so a certain amount of our experience is simply to know, this is the way I perceive this. So if you see, I don't know, a Catholic Mass happening in front of you, that's what you see. There's no way around that. And you can leave the space to know, oh, this is a constructed experience of me seeing a Catholic Mass. That's the important thing, is to understand that we have a certain repertoire of conceptual frameworks that makes us see the world we see. And therefore, we don't need to see it that way. But we also have to accept that we do. That's the middle way. That's actually the Buddhist middle way. It neither exists nor not exists. It's just part of our constructed experience that is changing and can keep changing. Meaning we can start seeing the puja as something completely different than we thought we saw initially, even though it's the same basic thing.
Right, or something else could be going on that weird.
That's right. And there's always something else going on.
Exactly.
Yes.
See, that's the thing I did get out of religion. I was like, yeah, I believe in spirits.
Yeah.
I don't believe God really cares if I'm, talking back to my mother.
Right.
That's a child.
Right.
I was a hard one, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have to focus on the beliefs that actually serve us, that actually prepare us. And there's something about that spirituality thing that probably was preparing you for something real and important. And other thoughts don't really prepare us. And that's what we need to suss out. Yeah. Thank you for that, Susan.
Cool. Thank you for a great talk and a nice discussion. It's time for us to wrap up.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Hear from our host.